Welcome to the webinar about the Things Network Stack v3. My name is Johan Stokking. I am tech lead of the Things Network and CTO and co-founder of the Things Industries. Today we are finally going to announce version 3 of our stack, which is the biggest update so far. So what is the stack about? This is just a quick overview. I will talk about the architecture and peering later, but the key features are that we will have support for LoRaWAN 1.1, 1.0.2, and 1.0. We will have different services, gateway agent that runs on the gateway, a gateway server, network server, application server, joint server, identity server, and a console. I will explain a bit later what these components are for. You can run the entire stack as a single binary or as microservices in clusters. So all these components are can be combined in one single binary that you can run from command line for testing, but you can also install it on a gateway or on a very small private network, but at the same time you can deploy these components as microservices in clusters. We will add peering support for the Things Network ecosystem, and we'll be adding roaming and support for third-party joint servers within the LoRa Alliance ecosystem. We will be releasing the minimum viable product in March of this year, and then in May for private networks, and in June for transitioning the public community network. And finally, all of these components will be open source and MIT licensed, and that's also a big change from V2. So over the last few years, when we ran the Things Network, we've been seeing different deployment scenarios and also different ways that people were using our stack or were trying to use our stack. So first, we have the public networks. So that's the public community network, the Things Network, the public network, as we all know it. There's also operated public networks. So there are network operators that use our stack for deploying a commercial public network. There are private networks, which could be software as a service on premises, Pico network, where you and maybe have just one gateway, just one solution in a box, and even offline networks that don't even have an internet connection. For example, on ships or in wild parks, just as an example. Finally, there's LoRaWAN development. So that's really for device makers, for application developers, for prototyping. And then you really need to know how the network works, how it behaves in a very controlled environment before deploying solutions on public or private networks. So when we started the Things Network, we started with version 0. It was really bootstrapping. So we released this a few weeks after Wink and I had our first brainstorm about the Things Network. And we really saw it as very simple. It only supported ABP, so fixed session keys. There was no device registry, no user accounts, nothing. Then I think half a year later, we released version 1, the staging environment, which already had quite a good design, but we really rushed it because version 0 was so limited. So it was a good idea, but the execution was not very good. Then version 2, and this is our current stack. And the focus has really been on the public network. And for the public network, it works really well. So we have more than 2,500 gateways connected. We route more than 3.7 million messages per day, which is quite a lot. But in order to run this, just the basic setup is already 20 to 30 microservices for just a simple private network environment. So for SaaS, when you want to have your own environment, it doesn't really scale, and it's very resource intensive. And same for private on-premises, Pico, offline networks, and it's really hard to set up. For LoRaWAN development, yeah, I think the public network is already quite good for development, but still it's too hard to set up the stack from source. There are too many external dependencies. Not everything in V2 is open source, and it's hard to debug the behavior of devices, for example. And to illustrate, you know, how it is to set up the private network, there is this guide that walks you through setting up the private network, and it's really a lot of steps, a lot of configuration files, a lot of components. Everything has to work. You have to work with tokens, expiration of tokens, yeah, command line, and that's only a very basic setup. You know, that's only the initial steps. So we want to make this much easier, and that's why we are now finally announcing Things Network Stack version 3. And this is a stack that is really made for all these deployment scenarios. So we really are addressing all the shortcomings at once. It's made for public networks, it's made for private networks, it's made for LoRaWAN development. And we take all the experience and lessons learned into account, and we want to do it right. It's quality first. There's no need to hurry. V2 is quite good, but we are very excited to be working on this and to releasing this shortly. The architecture. We have the gateway server, network server, application server, console, join server, which is a new component, and the identity server. And all of these components are open source, and there's also a command line utility to manage the network also from the command line. And let's look at the gateway side first. So on the gateway side, we have an agent and we have a server. And the agent runs on any Linux-based gateway. The server replaces the V2 router. And these two components have an authenticated and encrypted connection. And the agent works with a locally running packet forwarder. So we decouple the communication with the concentrator from the communication with the network server. And the agent allows for remote configuration and updates. So that means you can remotely configure the cluster to connect to the frequency plan, but you can even update the gateway remotely. And we'll also have packages for popular gateway models. So it will be very easy to install these gateways finally. And finally, there will be a support for low bandwidth mode, and this is I think very useful for cellular and satellite backhaul gateways, where you pay for the bandwidth per byte. And so, since LoRaWAN gateways receive all the traffic from all the devices, that it's also routing a lot of traffic that doesn't end up in the network that that the gateway is connected to. So it will be possible to filter on the gateway already based on the device address. So you can only, for example, send TTN traffic to the Things network, and send less status messages, and it's really to save costs on cellular and satellite backhaul. Then there's the V3 network server, and this replaces the V2 broker and network server component that we have. It handles the entire LoRaWAN MAC layer, 1.1, 1.0, 1.0, support for class A, B, and C, and it keeps the MAC state per device. So per device, you can configure the LoRaWAN and regional parameters version, and also radio settings, such as the timings for the receive windows and the data rate. And this is very useful, for example, also for satellites, where you will never be able to make the 1 second receive window because of the high latency of satellite. So you can configure devices to use 5 seconds RX1, for example, and this also works with MAC commands to configure these devices remotely. The application server replaces a big part of the V2 handler, and there will be extended support for payload functions. So the encoder and decoder payload functions are there to stay. So these are the JavaScript payload functions to decode and encode the binary application payloads in and from a JSON object, which is, I think, one of the most powerful features of the handler today. And you can set the payload format now per device, and this allows for different device models, even whole different devices, different firmware versions, and you will be able to manage devices in groups. So if you're managing thousands of devices in the console, you can now make groups and filter devices easily. Finally, there will be integration with third-party geolocalization services. Using LoRa, the time difference of arrival, RSSI, also geolocalization services that use Wi-Fi lookups. So these are optional plugins where you can connect to external services. You can also build your own service where you can connect to. We're also inviting the community to work on these geolocalization services. And next week at the conference, there will be a presentation about a geolocalization service that will also work with TTN, and that will actually support the time difference of arrival geolocalization. It's going to be very interesting. Integrations, the popular MQTT and HTTP integrations, they will be there. We will aim to support the same payload format so that your applications don't break. There will be more optional zero-effort commercial integrations for leading IoT platforms. Last week or 2 weeks ago, we released our integration for AWS IoT. We're working on an Azure integration as well. And it will also be easier to build your own integration. And then we have, of course, the console, which replaces the closed source V2 console. The V3 console will be open source, and it runs next to the application server for faster response times. It will have a new look, improved navigation. It's going to be very easy to manage your applications, gateways, and other settings. The identity server replaces the closed source account server, and this one will be open source as well. The identity server issues security tokens, the OAuth flow, but it also contains users, applications, and gateways, and we will be adding support for organizations. So you can create teams or groups of users that are together collaborate on gateways or on applications. Then we have another component, a new component, the join server. And the join server replaces the join part of the handler. And the join server stores the LoRaWAN root keys, and it derives the session keys. And that really means that you can run your own join server and to really keep the root keys there, and only the derived session keys will be sent to the routing cluster. You can deploy a join server inside or outside the V3 cluster, so you can run it on premises in your own trusted domain. And yeah, you have full control over your security keys, whatever V3 deployment scenario you use. It also gives you the power to switch from a public to a private cluster, from private to public cluster, from private to private. So whatever deployment scenario you choose, you can start with your own join server and use V3 public or private clusters, or switch later. Then there is the interoperability with the LoRa Alliance partners, and this is twofold. We support trusted third-party join servers. There are quite some specialized security companies that are offering join servers where you can have your keys provisioned, especially for large-scale batches of devices. And we will be supporting integrations with these trusted third-party joint servers. Also, there's the active and passive roaming of LoRaWAN 1.1, and we'll be implementing the LoRaWAN backend interfaces to support this active roaming as well with LoRa Alliance members. The free public network, our flagship service, currently runs in 6 clusters. The Things Network Foundation operates EU, US, Brazil, and Singapore. Then there's the Swiss Open Network Infrastructure Association that runs a public region in Switzerland. And finally, Meshed in Australia also operates a public TTN cluster. In V3, the pairing between these clusters will go through regional peering brokers. So we step away from the cluster-to-cluster interfacing that really made V2 very hard to scale and decentralized. And now, because decentralization will become much easier thanks to these peering brokers, we will be expanding gradually to the UK, to South Africa, Japan, China, Russia, India, more US, more Europe. So we have ongoing conversations with partners here. We also are still requesting propositions from the TTN community, and this is really adding public clusters to the public network. Then private networks. You can run and operate your own private cluster, and these private clusters can run fully independent. Private clusters can also pair with the public community network or with other private networks. And this is for uplink and downlink traffic. That means that for example, for public network, you can use coverage from the public network and you contribute coverage back to the public network. And this has to be in balance. So if you contribute 1,000 uplink messages to the public network, you get 1,000 uplink messages for your cluster back. So this is really in balance. But in order to keep the foundation sustainable and to cover the costs that we have annually on our cloud infrastructure and the net ID for private network pairing, the Things Network Foundation will charge a fee to cover the costs for net ID and handling of the pairing. So this is not for the traffic, but this is really for the private network in order to become part of the TTN ecosystem, make use of the address space that we provide, as well as the handling by these peering brokers. So you can imagine that we have quite a big burn right now on our cloud infrastructure to run the network. Finally, private clusters with service level agreements are also being offered now by the Things industries, also by partners as a service and on premises. So it's going to be very, very easy to set up private clusters also with uptime guarantees. So V3, it's one almighty stack serving all these deployment models. And yeah, for the public network, we'll be offering LoRaWAN 1.1, Class B, Class C, pairing, payload repository. This will be available for all these deployment scenarios. For software as a service, SaaS, it will be way more scalable, more feature complete, very easy to enroll. Also, pairing will be available. For on-premises, we'll be able to scale from a single binary, very small private network, to microservices, where if you handle way more load, you don't have any external dependencies. And also here, pairing will be available. For private Pico networks, so single gateway networks or offline networks that don't even have an internet connection, you can run the single binary on 7 platforms or on the gateway, no external dependencies. And these platforms are really the hardware platforms. So this is Mac OS, Windows, 32-bit, 64-bit, Linux 32-bit, 64-bit, but also Linux on ARM processors, for example, the ARM 64-bit and the normal ARM. So it's going to be very easy to run this stack. Finally, for LoRaWAN development, you can build the whole stack from source. There will be no external dependencies, and will be very easy to see what's going on in a very controlled environment, have the log files at your disposal before deploying your solution to the public or private networks. So yeah, when? Version 3. So we plan to release the minimum viable product in March, and then the source code will also be available on GitHub. The design and development already started in August 2017. We started from scratch. We are cherry picking from our V2 code base. The MVP really contains the new architecture, but it's not feature complete yet. So we are adding features every day, and we expect production deployments for private networks in May, and we will be transitioning the public network in June. So thanks very much for watching. For those of you who are coming next week to Things Conference in Amsterdam, looking very much forward to see you again. And once we have more information, more announcements, please keep an eye on our Twitter and on the forum and on our newsletter. And finally, if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out. Thank you very much for watching.